beauty of sort of Google Books is a kind of a real fantasy project. You know, you dream, everyone's dreamt for centuries of creating a sort of library in the sky. It's almost like a kind of psychedelic fantasy, but also a fantasy about total knowledge. And here was this excellent story. These people actually tried to do it. And so it had all the dream of the internet in it, but it also had all the dangers, because Google went and scanned a load of books, millions of books, that were actually in copyright without asking the permission of the authors or publishers, the copyright holders. So here was another example of how the internet tried to claim that it was providing benefits for everybody, but actually at the expense of the individual. You know, was the individual being rewarded in this activity, the creation of a global universal digital library that everybody was going to have access to? And I don't think it was. And I think the story, just by telling the story, I could kind of explore those criticisms without, if you like, imposing my agenda as a director or as somebody who thinks the internet needs to be thought about critically.
That's very interesting. How did you go about it? How did you start filming? Did you start digging at Google, or were you more careful about that? How did you start?
Well, there's a lot of reading involved, of course. You need to build a chronology, understand what your plot points are, what the big issues are, and then basically the big secret to directing is you pick up the telephone, you send emails, and you have to beg people to appear in your films. And in fact, in this film, you know, a lot of the people I was asking to give me interviews, they were so busy, you know, that it was no. And it was only when I wrote to them and said, you know, actually I've read your book 3 times, and I would happily sacrifice any body part, of which I have 2, if you'll give me an interview, that I got some, you know, I got some responses. They sort of read the emails, sort of chucking them. And I contacted Google very, very early on. I mean, the BBC, who I was one of the broadcasters I was making the film for, have a very strict code of ethics. You have to be very honest and upfront about what you're doing. And so Google were contacted very early on. This is what I'm doing. I'd really like you to take part. This isn't an assassination job. If you see my film, the film makes a lot of jokes at the expense of the other. I don't know if you've seen it. So the film makes a lot of jokes at the expense of the other side as well. It's actually quite balanced. But, you know, I have to admit Google weren't very cooperative. I don't think they really understood the concept of a balanced film, and that was quite disappointing. I had to work very hard against Google to make this film.
And why did you decide to enter the New York Film Festival?
Well, I got invited. I mean, it was fantastic.
Fantastic, and in applied science
Yeah.
section.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited because the film's already been on TV everywhere, and I made it in January. And went back in January, that was 6 months before Edward Snowden, right? So 50% of the people who watched my film and 50% who reviewed it said, what's this guy doing criticizing the internet? And Google, there's nothing wrong with these guys. He's just jealous that this company's more successful than him. And what's all that spooky music doing on his film? This director is paranoid. After Edward Snowden, all those criticisms dried up, never heard them again. And the film acquired a kind of new lease of life, as if the world was ready, you know, to think critically about the internet.